afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Tiger News Network's very first media event, Ben and Ben versus James and James, an American political special. For those of you out of touch with the world, 2010 has been the defining year of the Obama administration. Not only have they had some of their greatest triumphs, but they have also had their greatest disappointment yet, with the Republican gains in Congress from last month's election. Only 2 years ago, the Republican Party was wallowing in the fallout of the Bush administration. Nevertheless, in these 2 years, the Republican Party has made an incredible recovery. Today, we're here to discuss what we as CC students can learn from 2010 and what we can expect to see when the next American Congress begins this January. Joining us today are CC's top politically active students. To the right are Mr. James Zillenzeiger, columnist of The Catalyst, Mr. James Culver of the CC debate team. Seated to the left are Mr. Ben Tabor, head of CC Democrats, and Mr. Ben Quam, columnist of The Catalyst, also of the CC Democrats. Gentlemen, thank you very much for taking the time to join this debate. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a round of applause to our panelists. Thank you. This is how today's format is going to work. We will begin with a warm-up rapid-fire round. I will be asking each of our panelists one question. That panelist will have 90 seconds to answer. At the end of this session, we will have a 3-minute break for pizza, in which case we will then proceed to the serious discussion phase of today's program. Finally, I kindly request our audience to please silence your cell phones. Thank you. Right, this first question is addressed to Mr. Zillenzeiger. In your Catalyst article, The CC Liberal Out of Touch with Reality, you argue that CC students, being part of the bourgeoisie, are generally isolated from the broader political world outside of the campus. You've identified a problem. Can you name for us a viable solution?
Sure. Just to reiterate quickly, I talked a lot about CC students tend to focus a lot on social issues, especially abortion, gay marriage, and legalization of marijuana. And so my article was aiming at that they should focus a lot more on issues that are concerning the majority of Americans, which is economical issues. And for a viable solution, I would say that it's going to be pretty hard for CC students to really realize what economics is about until they really leave CC and start working in the business world. And I guess for now, what I'd recommend most is trying to take an economics class or some sort of class that talks about fiscal responsibility or government spending and other things. And that's not to say that that's going to immediately convert you, say, to conservatism or liberalism, but it will definitely give you a much broader spectrum to look at both sides of the issue and understand both sides of the issues, because when I tend to talk to CC students, they have a very stereotypical view of what necessarily a conservative might mean fiscally or what a liberal might mean fiscally. And studying in an economics class, I found the economics department to be incredibly well balanced, and they can present a really good viewpoint of both sides and just understanding both sides. But overall, I think the main thing is going to come when they go out into the business world, and you'll see after the age of 30, the demographics change largely between who identifies as a liberal and who identifies as a conservative.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Zillenzeiger. This next question will be addressed to Mr. Quam. In your last Catalyst article, Slacktivism, Intellectual Alchemy, you accused student organizations of CC of promoting the cause rather than taking direct physical action. Tell me, how then can students be inspired to take more direct action rather than simply, say, a Facebook picture?
Well, first I would just like to say thank you to yourself again for hosting this, and thanks to our opponents, James and James. It's lovely to be here. In my article on slacktivism, what I was mostly trying to get at is that a lot of what we do in terms of activist politics and stuff, we want to be terribly subversive against against the AIDS crisis that's occurring in sub-Saharan Africa, or against the issue of homelessness here in Colorado Springs. But oftentimes the actions we take are more feel-good measures personally than they are really about getting something done. I mean, the ultimate form of this is the Facebook profile picture change, which if you put a cartoon character on, you can end child abuse, right? I mean, no, you cannot end child abuse through your Facebook profile picture. So, I mean, what I want to encourage is, and I'm as guilty as anybody here, obviously, but is that each group at CC should have raising awareness as a natural byproduct of whatever really well thought out method that they have for impacting real change. To raise awareness or to raise visibility about an issue on campus should only be a side effect of enacting the real change that groups seek.
Thank you for that, Mr. Kwam. This next question will be addressed to Mr. Culver. James, do you find that CC students are generally well-informed politically, or are they more susceptible to misinformation and propaganda from our nation's news media, as opposed to some other groups in society?
To start off, I think that the 2008 elections really demonstrated the ability for CC students to be engaged fairly extensively in politics. You saw lots of individuals taking parts in rallies, albeit some of them for maybe the free t-shirts. We saw individuals, working closely with campaigns and so forth. And I think the issue that sort of presents itself is this problem of, after an election cycle where you have this competitive nature, you enter into somewhat of a lull in politics, and as a result you see a fair amount of decreased sort of political activism occurring. At the same time, I don't think that CC students are any more likely than another group in society to necessarily misinterpret information. That occurs because of a lot of different factors: where you get your news from, how often you're reading that news, and all of those things are going to play a large role in how we interpret issues. I think, though, that propaganda is perhaps the most interesting side of this type of question. As we all know, the CC political climate is fairly one-sided. I hope that this type of realization is not lost on you all in the audience. And there's a couple, I think, implications that occur from this. The first is this mentality of groupthink. It's much easier for us to accept positions that are not going to be challenged or that other individuals will agree with in conversation, and I think that inevitably leads us towards that type of dynamic. The second issue, I think, is access to information. By this, what I basically mean is we are continually fed from our peers a very consistent and one-sided political interpretation. What's important in this regard to remember is that as we enter undergrad, we are just reaching the time when we can fully engage in politics, we are able to vote and so forth, and as a result, a lot of our political ideologies are shaped in our undergrad experience. However,
I do apologize for cutting you off there, but 90 seconds was up. But thank you very much for that, Mr. Culver. The final question of our warm-up session will be addressed to Mr. Tabor. Ben, as head of the CC Democrats, were you generally disappointed or satisfied with the amount of student involvement in political activities on campus in the lead up to the November elections?
Well, the November elections were a midterm election cycle, so it is more difficult for students to have a vested interest within, say, the Colorado elections because there's not a nationwide presidential election going on. But given that, I saw a lot of great successes in this election cycle. For example, the Young Democrats, along with several other groups on campus, registered over 500 voters at CC. And people aren't going to register to vote unless they intend to vote at some point. Also, on a local level, the county issued 300, which was a ban on medical marijuana dispensaries in the county, failed by 300 votes out of 180,000 cast. And so thank you, CC, for being that swing few hundred votes to make that pass. So we did have an impact. And we also had an early vote rally that was fairly well attended. Unfortunately, the weather kind of put a damper on things. But that, combined with some very poignant opinions written in the Catalyst, indicates that CC students were pretty well involved in this election cycle.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tabor. That, ladies and gentlemen, concludes our warm-up session. We will now be taking a 3-minute break. Be sure to get some more pizza, go and use the bathrooms, get a drink. Next up is our serious discussion phase. Thank you.